China overtaking America for the second consecutive year in terms of its global leadership approval. I'll be asking what factors have led to the sharp rise in the admiration of China's leadership as the U.S. shows a dramatic fall in its rating. And in Ask China, we'll look at China's space program and hear how international collaboration is a win-win situation for all. Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. China has, for 2 years in a row, ranked higher than America in global leadership approval, according to Gallup in its annual Rating World Leaders poll. While China's leader earned a median approval rating of 34%, the U.S. standing is at 31%, the lowest since 2007, when the rating started. The poll was conducted from March to December last year in 133 countries and regions, based on random samples of 1,000 people in each of them. Pollsters asked people's opinion about leaders from the U.S., China, Germany and Russia. So what have led to China's rising approval rating? How is China perceived differently in different parts of the world? What's the advantage China has over the U.S. in terms of leadership approval, and where? Joining me here in the Beijing studio are Victor Gao, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization, and Rick Dunham, Co-Director of Global Business Journalism Program at Tsinghua University. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point.
Thank you.
Actually, we talked about this subject just days ago, but that last time we were talking about the change in the U.S. Leadership approval. Now we talk about China, and I want to bring up this draft which shows China's leaders' approval around the world in contrast to the U.S. leader. And we can tell that actually from the beginning, when this poll started in 2007, the red line is China and the blue line is the United States. China has a rather stable developed trend, especially since 2012, when the new Chinese leader Xi Jinping came into power. It's very stable and slowly climbing until last year, when it climbed rather considerably. In contrast, the United States, we can tell the peak, the plateau, was actually during President Obama's term, and then when President Trump came into office, it dropped dramatically. But interesting enough, for the past year, while China's rating went up from 31% to 34%, a rather big step, the rating for the United States also went up slightly. So let's first look at the big trend here. Victor, how can we explain the steadiness and upward trend of approval rating of China, and for the last year, especially 3%, a rather big jump?
First of all, China is much more in the news. China is being very active on the global stage, and I think China is not only talking the right talk, but also walking the right walk in terms, for example, climate change, in terms of globalization, in terms of defending free trade, and in terms of all kinds of natural disaster relief efforts. And I think the Chinese government has been very prudent, very measured in dealing with very much of international crisis or pressure on China, especially, for example, in dealing with the United States in the outbreak of the trade war initiated by the United States. I think the world is impressed by the responsibility and the sense of conscientiousness displayed by China in dealing with international matters. So I would say it's very logical and very natural for the steady increase of China's positive review by the world community. Further, allow me to emphasize another point. That is, under President Xi Jinping, China has been talking about the international community, the common shared interest of the future of mankind as a whole, as if this is very much of its own responsibility, and China is rallying resources of all kinds in China and on the global stage to work for the shared interest of mankind. I think this is the message that the world and mankind would like to see.
Rick, what is your read of the big trend and the slight turn in the last year?
Well, I would say over time, the biggest reasons would be that as the United States is becoming more America-centered, America first, China is embracing the globalism, and whether that is trade or the environment. I think that's one thing. The second is the economic outreach. If you look at Belt and Road Initiative, without debating the merits of Belt and Road Initiative, it is in Africa, it is in Latin America, it is in Europe, it is all around Asia, and so it's having a tick up. In the big picture, I don't think China or the United States should be satisfied, because we're talking about leadership approval in the 30s. You want to be higher than that. In Africa, both countries are above 50%. That's what you really want globally. But the key for China is it's going in the right direction.
I hope so. I hope so. So what are the factors? What really, when people think about China, especially when we're talking about people living in different parts of the world, what really would affect their perception of China? Is it what they hear in the news? Is it what they believe in their mind are certain values? Or is it the benefits that they're actually getting in their hands in terms of food, in terms of jobs, in terms of commodity or opportunities? Victor?
No, I think many things will combine together to have an impact on the people in different parts in the world about how they look at China, how would they review and view China. And I think how the media reports talk about China, and also very important, how China talks about itself, and whether people in different parts of the world can really see with their own eyes what China is doing in their community, for example, and also how China responds to international crises or major events, and how China would react to, for example, major accusations or allegations against China, would all combine together to have an influence on how people in different parts of the world reacting to China.
Rick, your take on this?
Well, I think that you can see, if you look at these numbers, we're talking about 133 countries, that one of the things that China should be happy about is more and more people around the world have an opinion about China. If you look many people around the world don't have an opinion about Russia. And I think especially if you look at Africa, the outreach there has paid some dividends, because number one, a majority of people in Africa have a positive opinion of China and the United States, but it's also more people have an opinion, so the information is getting there, whether it's a project or news coverage.
Right. I think it is very interesting, although we hear so much negative stories or accusations against Russia. Actually, in this survey, the recognition of Russia is actually quite fine. Russia is approved by 30%, the first time, as much as the United States. So I think for President Trump, or for those in the United States, probably there's something to think about. But I think another very important factor is the disapproval rate of the United States, not just the approval rating dropping, the disapproval rating of the United States. The leader of the U.S. as the world's leader is also a record high of 40%, much higher than China, which is 28%, and much higher than Russia, which is 31%. Victor, what does that say?
No, I think,
is it because America first?
I think over the past several years, especially over the past 2 years, the perception of the United States by people in many parts of the world have turned negative. Why? You're absolutely right. President Donald Trump is constantly talking about America first, as if the rest of the world should be dealt with as last and the least, for example. No country would like to be downgraded to a second or third class countries. Every country wants to be treated as an equal. If you deserve development, I also deserve development. Your development should not be conducted at my expense, for example. I think this should be the general expectation of countries in the world. Further, the United States used to be kind of standing on the top of the mountain, serving as a beacon of light and inspiration for the rest of the world.
Shining city.
Yes, exactly. But now it seems the United States is turning against itself in some of the very important principles, like, for example, protection of global environment, like, for example, free trade and globalization.
But I want to still mention this last year, where the rating of the approval rating of U.S. leader actually went up, right? We have to look into the details.
Well,
Rick.
I mean, you can see what happened. It's one person, Donald Trump. I mean, the drop was huge when he became president. The good news for the United States is the damage seems to have been done. Yes, the United States ticked up a little in the past year. The year before, in 65 countries, there was a double-digit decline in approval for the U.S. The good news for the United States is this happened before. After the invasion of Iraq, after the invasion of Afghanistan, George Bush was very unpopular. The United States position in the world was about the same as it is now, and as soon as Bush was gone and Barack Obama came in, it went back to the way it was before. So there is hope for the United States. I don't think it's necessarily lasting damage.
Well, but there is a variant, an X factor which has changed, which is China. Back then, China was not so much of a player, and now obviously the influence and the capabilities of China has gone up considerably compared to 2007, 2008. How do you look at the kind of future picture possibilities that might happen in the rating?
No, I think in some of the countries where China has the lowest rating, for example, in certain countries in the Baltic region, in Germany, for example, I would say there is an ideological twist in the story because certain countries, especially those former Soviet Union countries coming out from the Cold War, achieving their independence, they are still very much in the mode of ideological kind of perception of the world, for example, and they tend to believe China is a socialist country. Ideologically, they are very alien to the political system or the values that they are now pursuing, and they do not feel very happy about achievements in China, which they believe probably are made under alien ideology. But in reality, I think China also need to really communicate with these countries more. We need to really become more convincing in the way we communicate with them, telling the right story about China.
I want to say the approval of Chinese leader, the bottom 10 include countries such as Vietnam. Vietnam is the country that disapproved China or has the lowest approval rating, and then Sweden, Kosovo, which China doesn't recognize yet, India, Germany, Japan, Spain, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. So some of them are the countries that you talked about. But again, for Germany, for Japanese, I think there are a lot of communication work to be done there. Rick, how do you look at this list?
I agree. Well, I see a lot of Northern Europe disapproves of both China, U.S., and Russia even more, and its former satellite nations of Eastern Europe are the most negative, and I agree with Victor that has to do with the Soviet Union and the view of communism. But I think, I mean, to paraphrase Chinese government officials, this is not a zero-sum game. It isn't China going up means the U.S. goes down. And I think that for China, it's a matter of the image of China and to deal with it forthrightly, engagement, but also I think to frankly deal with criticism as they come up.
Absolutely. I think really we have to be able to take criticism maybe more in the future. I want to ask this question, Victor. Is the growing influence, the growing rating of the approval of Chinese leader a result of the declining rating of the United States? Has the vacuum been created by President Trump been advantageous for China?
Yes and no. A no in the sense that regardless of whatever rating of the United States, if China does the right thing, if China talks the right talk and walking the right walk, the approval of China will be expected to go up. That's regardless of whatever that happens to the United States. On the other hand, yes, in the sense that, after all, there is a kind of arms twisting between the United States and China as for which country is larger, for example, or more important. China is happy with the United States being the only hegemon in the world, but the United States, or at least there are certain people in the United States who have not yet come to terms with the prospect that eventually China may become a larger economy than the United States, and they view China becoming larger as an economy as a threat to the survival of the United States. And sometimes there is a kind of pro and cons in the relations.
Thank you very much, Victor Gao, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization, and Rick Dunham, Co-Director of the Global Business Journalism Program at Tsinghua University. And you're watching The Point. We'll take a short break, and when I come back, another episode of my Ask China series. Today we'll be looking at China's space exploration program and how global cooperation is pushing the frontiers for the benefit of all. Stay with us.